Hello, we are Brent and Marie from Artevelde Hogeschool and we are presenting our bachelor thesis which we have written in Chile in the capital city Santiago while we were doing our internships. So we both stayed in a host family and we were supervised by the Universidad de los Andes in Santiago de Chile, which supervised us at the internship at the CITES. Before we went to Chile, we already brainstormed a little bit about what direction we wanted to go, what we wanted to research. I wanted a more specific area on a macro view, like the economy, the crisis, the cost of living, how people can have occupations in general. And Marie wanted to focus on the activities, so we combined this together. And the way we did this was by making a picot table and a spider table. So with the picot table, we have made a population intervention comparison outcome, which made our research question more specific. With the spider table, our research question got more narrowed into a specific direction or area. Because it's a very wide subject and a lot of things could be investigated, we had to focus ourselves on one area of occupations or leisure activities as mentioned in the research question. So how did we do that? To read a lot about and to ask a lot about Santiago, about Chile, about the capital city. We walked around on the street, we sniffed the culture and the society there. And there were different things we could notice in Santiago, how life is almost as expensive as in Belgium. There is a very big difference between the social class system. We saw a lot of poverty and we saw a lot of fast development of the city without less attention, for example, green and other areas for people, for inclusion. So we noticed this and we wanted to have more specific proven information about this, so we researched this more in depth. Because there was so less information available or to find on the specific situation in Chile, Santiago, we had to start by researching things on the much bigger scale of society, and that's why we searched on many different sources such as Google Scholar, PubMed, ResearchGate, Elvizier, where we could really find evidence which could support and give an answer on our research question. We also made a bibliographic review, which was an assignment of our university, which also gave more information and evidence and in general a much better illustration about how important leisure activities are and why it is important to research this on a scale of social inclusion in Chile.
The research of this thesis started with an in-depth literature study about the country. From different sources, information was gathered that gave context to the country this research took place. Our goal is to give enough context to proceed and implement a qualitative method of research. For the interviews, assessing with semi-structured interviews was chosen, because there was awareness of what information needed more clarification or proof. This study wants to gather information about the opinions, attitudes, experiences and stories they have about participating in later activities when talking about feeling socially included. As well, the interview as the informed consent were drafted in English and then translated by the DeepL page. Once the questions were translated, they were checked by a Chilean professor. The interviews were carried out in a quiet context and they lasted between 15 and 25 minutes. The interviews were recorded by an audio recorder and were translated by the interviewers and also some Chilean students. All the transcribed interviews are coded. In the first phase, the transcripts were given codes according to the 3 subjects of the interview. The necessary information was isolated and given codes. When all of the interviews were open-coded, the codes were collected and put together by similarities. This way, they're giving a more specific code that is called actual coding. To proceed, more selective coding was implemented by fitting the similar actual codes to a few teams. From these teams, the information from the interview was all matched by a category. These formed the building blocks to start describing the research results. When we did the coding, we made a tree structure, where the teams are listed with their corresponding subteams. The first team was subjective feelings. When asked about the subjective feelings from the participants, they gave the answer that they feel discriminated and not feel included in society. They find that they are a sense of insufficient inclusion and they feel pushed aside. The second team is about occupations. The participants answered with some topics on this theme. They talked about their leisure activities. Two main activities were mentioned. The first one was socializing and the second one is taking time for themselves. When asked about their hobbies, they talked about participating more in passive activities. There were no participants member of a sport club and they also didn't know any sport clubs for people with disabilities. Technology plays a major role in the free time of people with disabilities. One of the participants talked about his work and some of the participants said that they got a lot of mobilizing exercises. The third team is about support. The participants talked about financial support. All of those receive financial support from external sources. Also, their family are a big support for them. At least one member of the participants was involved. The government was also mentioned, especially when it comes to costs. All participants talked about the benefits and support they receive from the foundations. The last team is about the problems. The adolescents feel disabled, especially when they are moving. They think that their possibilities are limited because of how society thinks. The main issue with money is addressed in two ways. One is the expensiveness of certain goods that a person needs. The other one is the difficulty to obtain money. Another problem is the gap difference. The gap difference is noticeable in Chile's
So, to discuss our research question, how do marginalized adolescents describe the access to leisure activities in different contexts Chile? We have shown that the collected data of the results have some congruence with the collected data from the literature study. There are, for example, many causes or many factors that influence the access to leisure. One of them has been money, so obtaining and gaining money, as well as buying expensive goods, the unbalanced purchasing power in the social classes, the social segregation and gentrification, which is causing the separation in society, and in the crisis in Chile, which is now causing unsafety, more criminality, and an overall less good environment for leisure activities. However, more research can be done on this data. Certain laws like the inclusion labor law is not justified enough when people talk about the feeling of inclusion or exclusion in society. And a big thing to point out is the great support of foundations, which is surpassing every other kind of received care. And there is almost no evidence found on the subject, and this is the biggest support they receive, even non-governmental. So the bigger parties in politics should be aware of this and have attention for these kind of facilities. The research is collected with limited data, and so it lacks also a mastering in the language. Saturation in the interviews was not received well enough because of the language barrier, and this could interfere with the internal validity. Further, is the size not sufficient enough to represent a whole marginalized population? Quantitative research, for example, could be done for a larger demonstration of the results, and also not every topic of our literature study was not asked a lot in depth, because some of the topics just lacks information which support some findings in our literature study.
Access to leisure activities is hindered by various things such as discrimination, lack of money, environmental problems, social classes, and lack of support from the government. It is also facilitated by healthcare systems and foundations. There's too little evidence on the added value of foundation for marginalized groups. As a result, they are not founded or supported by the government. This research proves some of the issues listed above. Some factors that influence this access can be acted upon. Further research can be done to increase and clarify the evidence of the. There are hardly any literature on the actual situation of this target group, due to the mainly global changes and the disadvantages it entails. Some problems in society are more ignored, including social included groups. There are many problems present, among which social inclusion remains a necessity to be addressed. Inequality in the world is only increasing, just as more people will feel marginalized. Theories and studies that have been established for decades still seem to be relevant. In some cases, the research situation have even been exacerbated. This study examined the access to leisure activities in different contexts of Chile and succeeded in finding evidence. Within occupational therapy, professionals in this country know better what they can work on to provide social inclusion in society.